Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hello guys, and Yasu, I believe that's how you say hello in Greek. I looked it up, so I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not saying it correctly, you all can take it up with Google Translate. But you're probably wondering, Avery, why are you trying or attempting to speak Greek today anyway? Well, today we're going to be talking about the Nancy Drew book, The Greek Symbol Mystery. So The Greek Symbol Mystery is the 60th book in the Nancy Drew series, and it first came out in 1981. And if I remember correctly, this may be one of the last books that Harriet Stratmeyer Adams worked on actively before she passed away. So if you've read this book in preparation for the episode, you know. But if you haven't read this book, you don't know. So I'm going to let you know. To preface this episode, this mystery makes no sense. And I know we've said this about other Nancy Drew books. You know, there's certain plot points that are like, that's kind of out of nowhere. I don't know if that logically makes any sense. When I say that this mystery, it was hard to find the mystery, I'm not even kidding. Like a lot of us that have read these books, we know there's usually 2 or 3 mysteries within one mystery. Nancy, is a multitasker extraordinaire, but this one, it was a struggle to figure out what the mystery even was. I don't know how this book passed, the publishing criteria. I don't know, did anybody proofread this before it got out to the general public? Because it really, really doesn't feel like it. But you know what? It's a Nancy Drew book still at the end of the day, and I love it no matter what. And I've had so much fun, going in chronological order for this podcast. But when I say this one was a struggle to read, it was. Now, the one redeeming thing about this book, it has some gorgeous book covers. So I was able to find actually 3 of these book covers, and I actually own each of these myself. And it was actually harder to find one of these on Google, so I'm glad that I happened to find these out while I was looking at used bookstores. So if you ever want to check out these book covers before I discuss them on the podcast, I always post these on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast. Just a heads up. You guys probably already know the drill by now. But the first book cover is stunning for the Greek Symbol Mystery. We have Nancy in what looks like the Acropolis in the background, and the sun is shining between the columns, and Nancy herself is in the foreground, and she's wearing this white striped kind of peasant type blouse with a green skirt. And when I say that I would wear this on vacation, I would totally wear this on vacation. It looks comfortable and stylish, which I feel like Nancy is kind of becoming more comfortable on some of these later covers. In the earlier books, she's dressed to the nines and just, wearing heels, a matching bag. And while Nancy is still very fashionable in these later covers, she looks more at ease, if that makes sense. She's probably not wearing heels on these cobblestones, Which, you know what? Good for you, Nancy, because I would not be wearing heels on cobblestones. I'm just telling you right now, because that is like a recipe for a twisted ankle. The other interesting thing about this cover, Nancy's holding this golden mask, and it looks kind of like C-3PO's face from Star Wars. It's just this weird gold mask. I don't know, but it draws your eye. Now, in the second edition of this cover, it's an updated cover, I guess, from the later 80s, early 90s. And Nancy's wearing a purple button-up shirt. She's in what looks to be like jeans or maybe a jean skirt, but she's inside her hotel room, and you can see kind of some of Greece and the Acropolis way in the background. But this is an actual scene in the book, and there's a basket of apples in front of Nancy, and there's a snake curled up on the handle, ready to strike Nancy. I don't like this one. This one's really creepy. I mean, it's accurate to the book, but if I had a snake show up in my hotel room, I would freak out. Also, the tagline on the cover of this book is, Nancy has her hands full when she uncovers a perilous and poisonous plot. Now, the third edition of this cover that I was able to find shows Nancy, Bess, and George standing outside, and they look like they're next to a store where there's a golden mask in the window, and this is accurate because this happens in the book. And you can see this little seaside village in the background. And Nancy, Bess, and George, like, all look super comfortable. Like, they're wearing what I think most people would wear on vacation, you know, plain t-shirts, tank tops, some skirts and shorts, and they look like they're ready to just go explore Greece. But I like this cover. It's not as creepy as that last one. And the tagline got changed for this book cover. This tagline says, Nancy comes face to face with danger and looks evil in the eye. So the funny cover spoof that I came up with to describe some of these books is, something tells me a mystery is going to Acropolis up. I like puns, guys, okay? So if you don't like puns, I came up with another cover spoof, and it's I didn't order the poisonous snake, because the one with Nancy and the snake in the basket of apples, it honestly looks like she ordered room service and she got more than she bargained for. So when it comes to giving these books a cover rating, I would give them 5 magnifying glasses. I love each and every one of these covers, even the creepy one, because they accurately depict scenes in the book, and it's just such a shame that the book covers are way better than the book itself. Also, this book is supposed to be what Labyrinth of Lies, the Nancy Drew computer game, is based off of, and I can totally see the resemblance in the fact that the plots make absolutely no sense on either of them. Now, really quickly, I'll read off some of the characters that we see in the Greek symbol mystery. So first up, we have Miss Jeanette Thompson, who is a neighbor of Nancy's. We have Mr. Dimitri Giorgio, who is the New York manager of the Fotini agency. Mr. Diakos, I hope I'm saying these Greek names right, who is the Fotini manager in Greece. And there's also someone named Stella Anagnost. There is Helen Nicholas. We're actually trying to help her find her cousin, Constantine Nicholas. That's one of the mysteries within this convoluted plot. There is a Mr. Issachos, who is, I just put angry guy on phone. Mr. Vatis, who is the attorney handling Helen Nicholas's case. Alexis Hios, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he's a rival shipping line heir. And Peter Scorles. Now I'll go ahead and read a brief synopsis as best as I could come up with for the Greek symbol mystery. Nancy, Bess, and George go to Greece to locate Helen Nicholas's cousin, Constantine Nicholas, her inheritance, and find out why Miss Thompson's checks to help Greek children have since been canceled and the Fotini agency has shut down. She also ends up getting tangled up in an art fraud scheme. You know, as you do when you go on vacation. So now it's time to read a quick newspaper headline synopsis that just kind of sums this book up. Nancy Drew solves a bunch of convoluted mysteries. She finds people, inheritances, and trouble. Do you like that? I'm playing around with sound effects today. It's kind of fun. So now let's go ahead and jump into some of the direct quotes and notes that I took for the Greek symbol mystery. So Nancy is apparently going to Greece on assignment for Carson, but their neighbor, Miss Thompson, also wants Nancy to check into something for her while she's there. So we already have 2 mysteries from the start of this book. The funny thing is that the title of chapter 1 in this book is actually Mystery Plus Mystery, which is very fitting. But Miss Thompson has been sending money to this agency called the Fotini agency, and she's doing it to help a family called the Papadopouloses. And she sends the payments to the agency manager, Mr. Giorgio, in New York, but the last few payments have just declined and the checks have bounced. And then to make it even stranger, Miss Thompson got a letter from Miss Papadopoulos saying she hadn't received the last few payments. But when Miss Thompson tried to contact the agency, they'd closed. So she's like, okay, well, I sent the agency the money. The people I'm trying to help aren't actually getting the money, so what's going on? So I wanted to look up what Fotini means to see if it meant something and it might play into this mystery. It means enlightened one. And there's also apparently a saint called Fotini in the Eastern Orthodox religion, which I found kind of cool. So Miss Thompson shows Nancy the canceled checks and says she never met Dimitri Giorgio and she had seen an ad to sponsor needy children in Greece. And I just said, look, I have a big heart, but this is sending up all kinds of red flags. Like, you know, you don't just donate to an agency that you're not sure is legit, and it's just so dumb. So Nancy is going to try to solve the mystery of the canceled checks and try to locate Helen Nicholas's cousin, Constantine, and Helen's inheritance. That's a really tall order. So anyways, Nancy studies the checks and she copies Mr. Giorgio's signature to take it with her because she figures it'll be useful and maybe she can figure out why these checks are getting canceled and where they're actually going. So the girls get on a flight from River Heights and they go to New York, and when they land, they go to the Fotini agency's address since they have a layover. And when they get there, there's people out front picketing the landlord, who's some guy named Mr. Sully, apparently. And him and George must bear some kind of uncanny resemblance because the people believe that she's his daughter and they won't let them within 5 feet of the place. So I thought for sure that Nancy was going to pull some strings, throw out her name, like not that anybody in New York knows who Nancy Drew is, but usually this is the point where they find a way in anyway, but they just give up. And so they just go back to the airport and they board their plane to Greece, and Nancy strikes up a conversation with the pilot. And it's kind of funny because she says, I flew a small plane once. And I was like, this is such a Nancy thing to say. Like, I swear that Nancy must be like neurodivergent because she does these things where she'll relate to people. She'll be like, oh, well, I did this once, or my mother died when someone says their mom died. And so this is just such a Nancy thing. I'm not gonna lie, this is kind of what I do too, but it's funny because the pilot is like, instead of being like, oh, okay, strange girl, he's like, oh, okay, and he lets Nancy sit in the cockpit, and then this other passenger, who is named Mr. Isakos, flies off the handle saying girls shouldn't fly planes, and he's getting off if that's the case. This guy is such a jerk. Like, of course they're not gonna let this 18-year-old girl fly the plane, but even if they were gonna let a woman fly the plane, like, what does it matter? But George gets really mad, and so she snaps at him and says, in case you didn't know, Amelia Earhart was an ace pilot, and so is Nancy Drew. Get him, George. So he calms down eventually, and the girls go to their seats, and Nancy finds a paper with the word Fotini on it in the aisle. So she's like, huh, okay, that's the name of that agency. So she picks it up, and it also has the Greek letter phi on it. Interesting. So Nancy asks a flight attendant on the plane for help translating the message on the note, and it says, meeting at Zapion on the 25th of May. And Nancy's pretty sure it's a huge military exhibit that's in Athens, Greece. So this next thing that I took note of, I just thought this was so funny and so unlike Nancy that I had to write it down. But after they discuss, this super important note, this evidence they found in the middle of the plane aisle, Nancy and Bess proceed to play tic-tac-toe on the back of it. It's a piece of evidence. What are you doing? This was so weird and so out of character. Like, I feel like Nancy would have normally just put it in her pocket and not written all over it. But anyways, Nancy and Bess play tic-tac-toe for a little while, and then Nancy goes to sleep on the plane because it's a long flight to Greece. And so while she's asleep, she feels her purse move beside her, but she doesn't think anything of it. She rolls back over and goes back to sleep. But later, when she wakes up, the Fotini letterhead is missing. Dun dun dun! Well, the villain probably saw you playing tic-tac-toe on the back of it, just saying. So I think that Nancy suspects that Mr. Isakos stole it off of her, but she can't really confirm that, and she can't go up to him and accuse him of stealing something that was probably his in the first place. So nothing really comes of that, but Nancy, Bess, and George, they get to Greece, and they're staying at this hotel, which is called the Hotel Skiros, that, according to the book, has views of the Acropolis. So that's pretty awesome. So when they get to their room, a porter sits down this basket of yellow apples for them, and Bess wonders aloud if Ned had them sent to them. But as George reaches for one, she sees a snake in the basket. So this is slightly different to the book cover. The book cover shows green apples, and it's obviously Nancy reaching for the basket of snake and apples, but I mean, she's the main character, so it makes sense. But she uses an umbrella to scoop up the snake and put it in a trash can with a rug on top of it. Ugh, it just makes my skin crawl thinking about it. But the porter takes it away, and the girls investigate the basket further once the snake's out of the room, but there's no note or clue anywhere on it. So after this happens, they decide to pay a visit to Mr. Vadi, who is the Greek attorney handling Helen's inheritance case, but his office is gone, and the person there now doesn't know where he is. So they go visit this town called Plaka to make up for, I guess, that lead falling through. So it's while Nancy, Bess, and George are in Plaka, they see this clergyman in a church leaving a nautical-looking box on an altar for a saint. And Nancy wonders if he might know Constantine Nicholas, but there's no reasoning for that. Like, why would she even think that? Just because he's carrying this box that's nautical-looking. I mean, like, and I guess Constantine's a sailor, but that's kind of a large jump to make. See, this is what I'm talking about. It's like somebody wrote this mystery, but they forgot to clue everybody in, like the reader. Hey, this is the mystery. This is what's going on. So it kind of comes off as being really bizarre. And Nancy will periodically find clues throughout this book, but they make no sense. Like, she doesn't explain, like, oh, this is why I came up with this reasoning for this. And so as the reader, you're just kind of like, huh? What does this random person have to do with the mystery? Also, it's at this point in the book, and we're a few pages in, but this is the first time that we're getting a mentioning of Helen Nicholas's missing cousin, Constantine. Like, we haven't heard his name up to this point, so it's kind of strange. But we also didn't know that he was a sailor until this very moment. So this is what I mean. It's just such strange pacing and strange writing. So Nancy, Bess, and George start to chase this clergyman, but then they lose sight of him, and then they just quickly give up, and they're like, hey, let's go shopping. I mean, not gonna lie, that's probably what I would do, because I'd be like, we're on vacation. I'm not gonna chase this random man outside of this church. And yeah, I would much rather go shopping. So the girls quickly abandon their mission and they go shopping, and they see this golden mask being taken down from a window of a shop. But when they go inside and express interest in it, the shopkeeper tells them it's sold and she has no more like it. So the girls are disappointed and they leave the shop, and Nancy can't get it off of her mind. But while they're outside, they see a man selling sponges, and when they stop to eat ice cream, this other man comes up to ask them if they're American and if he can show them around Athens, but they decline. Which, you know, pretty smart move on their part. I was thinking they were going to take him up on it, but I don't know. If I was in another country and I had someone asking me about my nationality and insisting on showing me something, like, it's sad that this is the world that we live in. Like, I would love to learn about the local culture from a local, but sometimes, like, when people approach you like that on trips, it's just so suspicious, and I just don't, I can't do it. And it's sad because I want to believe that everyone is nice, but there's people in my own country, like, if someone came up to me and started, like, asking me questions or saying, hey, I want to show you something, I would be like, red flag, stranger danger, please get away from me. So shortly after this would-be tour guide leaves, Nancy finds an extra package in her shopping bag, and she's like, huh, this isn't something that I bought today. And it turns out that it's the golden mask from the store, and it has a sticker on the back with the, again, phi symbol and a snake. This kind of reminds me of when I order stuff off of Amazon, and I'm like, oh, how did this get in here, when the package shows up? And I'm like, oh, I must have left that in my cart and accidentally ordered it. Oops. So Nancy, being the honest person that she is, wants to return the mask to the store because she knows that she didn't pay for it, but the store is closed, so instead she goes to this museum and decides to ask them about it. Again, I don't know why she does this, because it's like, it belongs to this store. I don't know why you're going to a museum, but she goes to this museum, and then they accuse her of stealing it. So she gets held there, and apparently this mask is like an actual art piece from like thousands of years ago, and there's no telling like why it was in this gift shop. We're just supposed to understand that it was acquired illegally, but Nancy gets held there, and then George had walked Bess back to the hotel earlier since she wasn't feeling well, so Nancy calls their room and she tells George to call her dad. So George calls Carson, and then she goes to Nancy since they're not going to let her leave the jail, and Bess meanwhile wakes up from a nap and she sees a man leaving the room, which is super creepy. Like, the fact that, like, if this happened to me, oh, I would panic. But he took the basket of apples, and so she's really unnerved by this, and she goes to the museum too to find Nancy and George, and soon Nancy's able to leave without the mask. But can we talk about how fast Carson Drew works? Because apparently Nancy was in that jail for less than an hour or something, because they tell her, okay, you can leave. This would not happen in real life. But after this, the girls go to the Greek branch of the Fotini agency, and they meet a guy named Mr. Diakos, and he seems outraged by the idea that Mr. Giorgio is in New York and he could be scamming people out of money. But that's really all that we get from him, and so you're kind of left to believe, like, is he outraged because he really is mad about it, or is he in on it? We don't know. So next, Nancy visits this guy named Mr. Musiadius. I don't know if that's how you say that name. It's probably not. But he's a friend of Carson's who just lends 3 American teenagers his car while he goes off to Italy. I was like, excuse me? Like, I would not. I don't know. I don't care how good of a driver you are. That just seems like a bad idea. But I just said, I hope they have international driver's licenses. So next, Nancy, Bess, and George go to this town called Piraeus to check out a Nikos-owned ship. Apparently, she knows that Constantine worked for them. There's no, we don't get let into Nancy's thought process on this at all. So she apparently knows this information, but we had no idea that he did. So there's some guy aboard this ship that gives them passes to roam around the boat and a random picture of Constantine that he just happens to have on his person. All these coincidences, I'm telling you. So then while they're on board this ship, George asks if anyone speaks English. And I was like, you're in Greece. This is such a tourist thing to do. Like, I get it. You're trying to find someone that can communicate with you, but it's like, that's not their native tongue. Like, you should probably learn to speak a little bit of Greek. So while they're trying to find somebody who speaks English on board the ship starts to take off while they're on it. And so they panic. They're like, no, don't take us out to sea. And so once they get back on land and that misunderstanding is handled, they take the car that this guy let them borrow and they get run off the road by a truck. And this is why I'm like, why did he lend them their car? Apparently, Mr. Musiadius did not know that Nancy had such a bad track record with ships and cars. So this poor guy's car is in this ditch, and there's a family that lives down the road that helps them, and that's really nice of them. That was great. That was a heartwarming moment in this book. So after they get out of the ditch, Nancy, Bess, and George visit the Papadopoulos family that Miss Thompson was making these payments to, and Maria gives the girls a beautiful embroidered handkerchief. Each of them gets one, and so one of her daughters also gives them some goat's milk. But again, as far as the car wreck goes, we don't know if it's someone who intentionally ran Nancy off the road or she just can't drive. I love how this book just skips around and it's just like, oh, okay, here's a disaster, and then here's something nice that happens to them. It's just, I don't know. But this family that the girls are visiting with is kind of poor, but Bess just whisks this whole picnic basket full of food out that she's had in the trunk since Athens. Like, nobody knew that Bess had an emergency picnic. And also, I find it hard to believe that the contents of that picnic wouldn't be all over the car after they went into the ditch, but you know what? I will suspend my disbelief. But of course, there's food involved, so George has to take this opportunity to be mean to Bess, and she says, as if, we care what she has to say anymore, she says, it's the first time you haven't gone for second helpings. I honestly don't know why they still invite George on these trips. Of the 2 options, Bess is the kind of friend you want, because not only did she pack a picnic, but she packed their swimsuits so they could go swimming. She's a queen. George is just mean. But unfortunately, Bess does get stung by a jellyfish when they go swimming, and there's a lifeguard that has some ammonia, but I was like, that's so much better than someone having to pee on Bess's foot. But he comes over and he doctors her up after she's been stung by this jellyfish. And it turns out that this lifeguard is named Alexis Hios, and his family just so happens to own the Hios shipping line, and they are a shipping line that's in direct competition with the Nikos line that Constantine Nicholas's family owns. So they ask him if he knows where Constantine is, and he says he doesn't know, but he invites them to hang out with him later. So after this happens, Bess and George see the angry guy from the plane, Mr. Isakos, that yelled at Nancy because he didn't want girls flying a plane. And so he's arguing with who Bess thinks is the guy who stole the apples from their room when she woke up from her nap. So they find out that Isakos is in room 986, and they're in room 968 at their hotel. So maybe the apples and the snake were meant for him. That actually makes a lot of sense, because this guy has not been nice to one person. So if anybody deserves a snake sent to the room, it's him. So at this point in the quote-unquote mystery, the girls go back to the jewelry shop where the mask was, but the woman denies knowing anything about a gold mask, even though it was in the front window of her shop. And Nancy overhears the name of their hotel being said in in the back room. So when the girls leave the shop, Nancy pulls out her Greek dictionary, and according to what she overheard, something is going to happen to them at their hotel at 8 o'clock p.m. Also, I guess at some point since landing in Greece, Nancy has this Greek to English dictionary because she had the flight attendant translate that note for her earlier, unless like her dictionary was in her suitcase and she couldn't get to it or something. But anyway, she translates this and she's like, oh no, something bad's gonna happen to us at our hotel. So later that night, the girls are extra cautious because they might get jumped or something. They don't know what's gonna happen. So they hear a page in the lobby for Nancy Drew and they say she has a phone call. So on a hunch, Nancy goes upstairs thinking someone is probably trying to keep them away from their room. So Nancy goes upstairs and sure enough, they see a man trying to get in their room. And meanwhile, George has gone to the phone to answer it and pretend to be Nancy. And so Nancy's chasing this man, but he gets in an elevator. So she takes the stairs to the lobby and then Nancy and George reconvene and George says that some reporter was wanting to write an article about Nancy. And Nancy thinks that this person was just working in cahoots with the man that they saw near their room. So at about this time, Bess comes up and says she saw the man leave the elevator and he said Drew before jumping into a car. And so she thinks that Isakos was in the car with him. So the man got away, but Nancy just now remembers that the man threw something at her in the hall outside their room. So they go back up there in the hallway and they find a metal stamp with the same serpentine symbol that's on the golden mask. So now, on a complete hunch, because this is all that it is, Nancy has no reason to believe that they should go here. She just decides that they should go here. Bess, and George go to this monastery at 2 or 3 in the morning because they think something's going to happen there. And so they hear all this wailing, and then all the monks run out of the monastery, and they see a man in a black robe go by. And then this detective that was on to Nancy earlier about the mask tells Nancy to freeze, and he apparently followed them from the hotel. This book is so crazy. So the girls take this time to tell the detective that they think someone is trying to steal things from the monastery. So they and the detective just waltz in to this monastery at 2:30 in the morning, and George interrupts this monk praying. It's like, it's a monastery. What did you think they were doing here? So the next thing that I wrote down is the girls go back to the jewelry shop where the gold mask was from the next day, and Bess asks about Constantine Nicholas, and one of the women gets mad and said he's hers, and Bess can't have him. It's always been so weird to me how whenever the girls try to interrogate people about different suspects, if they are of the male persuasion, people are always like, oh, you want to date them? And it's just like, no, we're trying to solve a mystery. So Nancy and the girls go to this cafe and they're piecing together these clues that apparently only they know about, and they're writing them down when a cat jumps up on the table and scatters the clues everywhere. So the girl from the shop who was mean to Bess and was like, you can't have Constantine Nicholas, hands back the scraps of paper and she says her name is Stella. So now I guess she believes them that they're just trying to find him and locate him, not because they want to date him. And so she's going to play nice now, but she asks if they know where Constantine is, but then this man who looks like the one they saw with Mr. Isakos the other day grabs her by the arm and pulls her into a taxi. But as he's getting into the taxi, he drops a money clip with the initials DV on it. So after this happens, something else happens. Bess gets her wallet stolen at the Acropolis and they report it to the police and then go to some money exchanges. They're trying to figure out, they think, well, someone stole all of Bess's money. It's American money. So of course they're going to have to convert it into Greek currency. So they go to all these money exchanges and Bess ends up accusing this little boy of being the thief, and it's the wrong kid. So they single-handedly almost cause an international incident, and it's like, I know Bess wants her stuff back, but it's like, you should probably know before you make any kind of accusations. Like, she grabs this kid. So Bess apologizes, but honestly, she should have apologized more because it was awkward to read. It was horrible. But when they get back to their hotel, there's a note saying to go to a certain room number. And so Bess is scared, and Nancy and George go to investigate, but it's just Helen Nicholas. I seriously get Bess being cautious about this, though, because so many bad things have happened to them on this trip. But Helen Nicholas isn't alone. She's also brought Miss Thompson with her, and so everyone goes to this amphitheater that's near the Acropolis, and while they're there, Helen overhears someone say that her cousin Constantine has been hiding in Piraeus, which, that's where we were the other day when Bess got stung by that jellyfish, and that lifeguard, Alexis, told us that he didn't didn't know where Constantine was, so was he lying? But they also overhear someone talking about these stolen vases, and they hear the name Issachos in connection with that. So they see some graffiti with the snake symbol and the initials DG there at the amphitheater also, which they assume just stands for Dmitri Georgiakis. Like, they just jump to this conclusion. There's a lot of jumping to conclusions in this book. So after everyone is trying to leave this amphitheater, their car won't start when they try to leave, so Mr. Issachos apparently messed with it and paid a boy not to say what he saw. They find this boy and they interview him, and he's like, yeah, this strange man told me to look the other way when he was messing with your car. So the girls interview some sailors nearby, they chase Issachos, and then they talk to the police and they get the car fixed. There's just so much going on, but they do get a tip from the sailors that Mr. Vatis, who is the attorney that was working on Helen Nicholas's inheritance case, is hiding out in Corfu. Okay, maybe now we can get somewhere. So everyone goes to Corfu and they find Mr. Vatis, and George is briefly kidnapped and gets away. But the next day they confront Mr. Vatis, who drops this golden bracelet that they pick up, and Bess calls the police and they take him into custody. So Nancy tells the police that she thinks Vatis has been blackmailing Constantine Nicholas, and that's why he won't show up, he won't appear. But he got wrapped up in an art fraud scheme, and again, we don't really know. I mean, there's the bracelet, there's a couple clues, but it's just like, it's all just rolled up in the end, very messily. But at this point, Nancy and Helen discover this safety deposit box of her uncle's, and someone has been paying the dues on it, which is kind of strange. But Bess runs into Stella again, the girl that apparently has a crush on Constantine Nicholas, when she's shopping, but she won't talk to Bess. She just ignores her, which if I was Bess, I would be like, good riddance, I didn't want to talk to you anyway, you're mean. But it is kind of suspicious because she got pulled away from that cafe table when they were talking about Constantine. That guy took her away, so Bess kind of thinks that maybe that guy is telling her not to talk to Nancy, Bess, and George, which when I'm referring to her, I'm referring to Stella. I can't keep all these characters straight. So it's at this point in the mystery when Ned, Bert, and Dave come with Carson, yay, because they always conveniently show up on Nancy's mysteries, which I kind of like, I'm not gonna lie. I think it's kind of fun when they all six get to do things together. And this next note that I wrote down just has to do with some slang. I thought this was funny because Bess says it's hotter than peppers outside, which I've never heard this expression before in my life, but now I want to use it. Like, next time it's 90 plus degrees, I'm gonna be like, it's hotter than peppers outside. So the next thing to happen in this mystery, because enough hasn't happened already, we've had so many disasters, car wrecks, and ships taking us out to sea almost, and people threatening us. Nancy and Ned get thrown in a barrel at the monastery, and some mosaics get stolen, but they are rescued by a monk. And then they find Constantine, who admits to getting mixed up with the art thieves. So he was just hiding out at the monastery, which, you know, I can't really argue with that. That's probably one of the safer places that you could hide out if you were a convicted criminal. But this next thing, I cannot excuse this, but Bess calls Constantine cute in front of Dave, which is so messed up because it's like, Bess, you're dating Dave. Why are you even talking about this other man in front of Dave? It's really not cool. So the next kind of couple things happen to wrap this mystery up, but Mr. Issachos pushes Nancy into traffic, which was super scary. They catch him and Dmitri Georgiakis, who apparently is Mr. Vauti's brother, the guy who was over Helen Nicholas's inheritance case. And then at the end of the book, Helen buys a yacht and she names it the Nancy Drew. I'm sorry, I'm calling it now. This is the absolute worst name that you could give a boat because this thing is not a good seafaring vessel. If it's named after Nancy Drew, it's gonna sink. And that's the end of this book. Oh my gosh, so much stuff happened, so many characters, like I could barely keep it straight myself. So now we'll go on to the segment that I like to call What's Cooking? So some of the Greek dishes that we saw in the Greek symbol mystery, we saw moussaka, green salad with feta cheese and olives, and moussaka is just like eggplant, potato, and ground beef. We saw the girls enjoy some goat's milk and vicinata, which is cherry water, and it's like a sugar drink. Now let's talk about some of the things that Nancy could add to her resume. So Nancy was at least trying to learn some Greek in this book, so I put she's trying to learn the Greek language. So now let's talk about some of the things I liked and didn't like about the Greek symbol mystery. So the things I liked about this book, I liked the Greek setting, but that's really the only thing that I liked. The things I didn't like was it just seemed like this mystery was really convoluted and messy. There were too many storylines. There were a lot of characters to keep straight. So for that reason, I am just going to give this book a 1 magnifying glass rating. I really wish that I liked it more. I mean, I still like it. Like, it's a Nancy Drew book. I always love Nancy Drew books, but this one was very hard to finish. It was just, there was a lot going on. So yeah, that concludes today's episode, and I hope you guys will tune in next week because we're going to be talking about the Swami's Ring. This is the 61st book in the series, and I haven't read it yet, so I really don't know what it's about. So we'll be kind of figuring it out together. So I guess I assume that it has to do with a ring and a Swami, which in Hinduism, a Swami is a religious teacher or a senior member of a religious order. So I don't know. I guess we'll find out next week. Until next time, thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at True Drew Podcast.